you want me to. How's that?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Welcome to the January 26th, 2022 regular meeting of the Citizens Oversight Committee for the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. I'm going to take a roll call right now, and for benefit of Michael, what I'll do is also introduce people with their specific appointments. So we have Kingston Cole from Taxpayer Group.
Here.
Larry Minikis, Environmental Group.
Here.
Michael Wara, Civic Group.
Here.
Did I pronounce that correct?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Lee.
You mentioned, you forgot me. I'm the Taxpayer Group. Okay.
No, he said that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Lucy Dilworth, Fire Prevention Group.
Hi. Hello.
Okay, Rebecca Suggs, Novato Zone area.
Here.
Pat Randolph, San Rafael Zone area.
Here.
Max Perret, Southern Marin Zone area.
Here.
And Jennifer Howard, West Marin Zone area. Okay, we'll note her as being absent at this moment, and we can just have her recorded when she joins in. I'm Larry Choof, representing the Southern Marin Zone area. Okay, next item on our agenda, our first item, are agenda adjustments. And I'm going to ask the committee to see if they're willing to move item 7A to the top of the agenda. That's the transfer of chair. The agenda was written kind of in an odd way where we would have a transition to the new chair right after the roll call was done, but the formal recognition of that isn't until further down into our agenda. Also, what I would recommend for consideration, if we think about it in 5 months, is to actually have our elections in the June meeting so that there can be the total facilitation of that meeting by the outgoing chair so that the incoming chair can just pick it up for the new meeting. So I would need a motion.
I'll move 7A to the top of the agenda.
Okay, motion
I'll
second.
second it.
All right, motion and a second. We can just take this by a show of hands or say aye.
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 Okay,
All the above.
all the above. All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. So at this point, our bylaws state that there is no election for the incoming chair. It's an automatic transition from the vice chair, given that there are only 6-month terms. And at this point, I will, as they would say, hand the gavel over to Lucy.
Well,
And the gavel for.
thank you, Larry. And thank you all. It's an honor to serve in this role. Larry, I'd like to recognize you for all the good work that you've done as chair to lead us through a defining period for the COC. We've made an excellent start on our report. And also, on a personal note, I want to thank you for the advice and mentorship that you gave me during my tenure as co-chair. It was immensely helpful. So I'd like everybody to join me in recognizing Larry, if you would.
Hey, Larry.
And I would like to second that from the other end when he was my co-chair.
Thank you, everyone.
Great advice, all along.
Looking forward to another 3 years as a committee member and working side by side with all of you.
Great. So I just wanted to say that there's no doubt that I'm going to be making lots of procedural mistakes as we observe the formalities. I just haven't got this down. So can you all be vigilant and help me make sure that the rules of the COC are being followed? So nobody's off the hook. Everybody has to pay attention. I just want to say that we got a lot of work to do in the next 6 months, but mainly finalizing our report, issuing our report, and then the work cycle starts again. But based on the efforts of both my previous chairs or predecessors, we now have a very well laid path to follow. So thank you both. And so do we move on to
Public
action?
expression.
No, where do we move on to, Mark?
Open time and public comments.
Okay.
Madam Chair, a minor issue of order. Since the representative from West Marin, Jennifer Howard, is still not on the call yet, like I said, I was just going to try and stall through that. But maybe we can just do the introductions where, Michael can talk a little bit more about himself and his interest when we have our committee reports.
Okay. Rebecca, you had something?
Yeah, Lori has been trying to get, Jennifer has been trying to get in and is stuck somewhere. Lori, can you give her a hand? Do you have her phone number?
I do not. Is she using the right link? There was an old link that you guys have been using, but we change that every year. And so there's a new link and it's on the front of your agenda.
If you could help her out
Okay.
at 650, sorry, this is going to be public. I don't want to do that.
Can you send it to me in a chat? Is
Rebecca,
chat
if you
public?
text it to me, I'll text it to Lori.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And let's see if we get it right. Let's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So while we're waiting, let's begin with Michael, and maybe he can give us some description.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. Thanks very much for welcoming me to the Citizens Oversight Committee. I'm excited to join and to participate in the work of the MWPA and hopefully support it. And I direct the Climate and Energy Policy Program at Stanford University, where we do a lot of work directly with policymakers, basically connecting Stanford research and analytical capacity to policymaking in the state of California and in Washington. And I'm a lawyer and used to be a long time ago a climate scientist. And for about the past 5 years have been intensively involved with wildfire issues in California. I was a wildfire commissioner. Until this January, I served on the California Catastrophe Council, which is the oversight board of the Wildfire Fund. And I work closely with California Senate members on various bits and pieces of wildfire-related legislation. Last year, SB 332 with Senator Dodd, which was a bill that modified the liability regime for prescribed fire in California. Working on legislation on the the prescribed fire claims fund this year, probably. So these kinds of things. And I also do a lot of work in clean energy. And I'm super excited to be here. I'm just, I think I was, one sort of strange thing about me. I'm not a professional disc golfer, but I will be racing the Leadville 100 mountain bike race this summer. So that's my big goal for the spring and summer, is to get fit enough not to die doing that race, just to finish. My goal is finish. So
where is it? Where is it? Through really rough terrain?
It's in Leadville, Colorado, and the start is at 10,000 feet and it goes up to about 12,500 over 104 miles. So it's an adventure. That's how I'm going to look at it. Anyway. So thank you so much for welcoming me to the committee and to the work of the MWPA. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thank you. We're
Welcome,
very
Michael.
excited to have you.
Yeah, really happy to have you. Very much so.
So since there seem to be still some troubles getting Jennifer to join us, shall we move on? Because we do have quite a heavy workload for this agenda, and she can, when she joins us, we could take a break and have her introduce herself, or Rebecca introduce her at that point. So let's move on to open time for public expression. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones. Is there anyone there who would like to speak to us?
And Lori's probably trying to reach out to
Oh.
Jennifer, so I'll look for any raised hands. So, and I'm looking for raised hands, and I do not see any raised hands from our members of the public.
Okay, moving on. So we then, next item is the executive officers report. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Lucy. And I'm fairly convinced I'm not going to have to go running outside in the rain and wind to secure Christmas decorations tonight. So we've got that going for us. And I too want to extend my thanks to Larry Chu as his time as chair. And I know that Larry has been mentoring me as well when it comes to being a government official. And so Larry, thank you very much. I know you probably all saw the Colorado fire down in Monterey, and we're going, wow, can that happen in Marin? Well, so a good friend of mine is battalion chief down in that area, and he was intimately involved in that fire. So I gave him a call yesterday, and they are at about the same percent normal of rainfall as we are. So they're a little bit above average in rainfall than we are. They had a recent storm, more recent than ours, that the storm that we got that had just a little bit of rain here, they got a lot of rain. And so they only had, 2.5, 3 weeks of drying before that fire started. You may have seen in the paper today that it was started by a burn pile, which is really disappointing. And the article was vague on who had the burn pile going, if it was permitted, if it was allowed. I can't imagine that any fire official would have allowed a burn pile in that weather pattern. Even though there's frequent fires in that area, in fact, you might remember the Sobranas fire in 2016. This particular chunk of 700 acres was outside of any other recorded fire history. So that means there was an abundance of fuels that have been accumulating over decades. And those fuels went through 2 subsequent droughts. So even with that rain, that's where I've been talking about the medium fuels, or the light and medium fuels are really reactive to the rain. We get into those heavy fuels, they stay dry. And if you get an ignition and the embers coming from a burn pile have a much higher probability of starting a wildland fire than other ignition sources. So that was another thing that you had going for it. And I'm sure many of you have driven over the Bixby Bridge, which Bixby Creek goes into Palo, Colorado, and you know how steep that area is. And not just steep, but numerous intersecting drainages. It is a horrible place to fight fire. And I know from personal experience of being an ops section chief on the Sobranas fire, and Palo, Colorado was one of the biggest thorns in my side during that entire fire. And we would have this persistent marine layer that would extend a 1/4 mile in, and we would still have extreme fire behavior underneath the marine layer. And it was just going, why is this happening? And so I can see, after my experience with that, I could see how the Colorado fire was able to get to 700 acres last week. Can it happen in Marin? Yes, I think it can. Does this mean that we are entering into an early fire season already? No, I don't think one fire like this indicates that we are getting into fire season, but it's definitely worth watching. When I compared our fuel moistures in Marin currently to the fuel moistures that are in Monterey now, ours are trending just a little bit higher than theirs. But we've given up the notion that there is a fire season. We understand there is a wildfire threat year round now, and all we've been doing is adjusting our what the fire service is calling preparedness levels. It's still a new term that not all fire agencies have adopted, but Marin County Fire has, and so they're in what's called winter preparedness. So there's still wildland fire equipment on the engines. There's still people staffing those engines, not as many engines as we would during the summer, but we can still mount a wildfire response. And we will continue to keep watching other areas in the state and make sure that we are positioned properly in case we have an ignition here in Marin. And also what I'd like to emphasize is the great thing about the wildfire prevention work is we never stop working. It doesn't matter if we're in wintertime. In fact, a lot of times wintertime might be the best time for us to get some of our work done. We're continuing to work. I did want to welcome Lori as our clerk. She's with Regional Government Services, and she is through our contract with RGS, providing our clerk services now, taking a tremendous workload off of Ann and myself. So that's been phenomenal. As you probably saw, we did see, the board did approve our management analyst position and a grant specialist position. So our management analyst, in a nutshell, will be a jack of all trades in the administrative world of government, ranging from HR to clerking to helping with contracts and purchasing and procurement and such. So once we finish that recruitment, we'll have to say goodbye to Lori, which will be disappointing, but at least we'll be getting some more support in to support the activities of MWPA. The grant specialist we're looking for as a contract position. We're also working on vegetation management specialists, and these would be the people, and we're still working with operations on the total job description, how they're funded, and more, and a flow of communication and a flow of work. But the concept behind it is we need support for the member agencies in writing many of their proposals. And once those proposals get approved in the work plan, then they would support Ann and Panorama with the data collections they need to go through environmental compliance. Once environmental compliance is completed, then that vegetation management specialist would reach out to our management analyst and get the appropriate contractor for the project. They would go out and get that contractor lined out. All right, these are the parameters of your project, cut from here to here. We want you to do this, this, and that. This is the sensitive species that we need to be aware of. If you have any questions, here's my number. I'm available whenever you need me. And in a perfect world, it might be someone that can even start doing some biological surveys for us, because it'll be a lot cheaper for us to have the VMSs perform the biological surveys than us to use a contractor. The hourly rate will be significantly different. And then they'll go in and have check-ins with the contractor, make sure everything's tracking properly. When the project's done, they'll have a closeout with the contractor. Yep, you did your work the way you were supposed to. When the invoice comes, management analysts will call that vegetation management specialist. Hey, contractor ABC just sent us invoice. Are we approved to pay? And they'll say approved to pay under this project code, which will automatically help us track that this project was spent with these amount of dollars. It was assigned to the San Rafael Corps. And so it'll have that help us with that tracking all the way through. So we're really looking forward to having that piece of the equation worked out. Speaking of work plan, we are very heavy into developing our work plan portal. We launched a beta today, in fact, and sent out an email to a group to start beta testing the application portal, and we expect it to go full force next week after the advisory technical committee. Brown Act ramifications were far more complicated on that portal than we had appreciated when we entered into the development of that portal, because it can lead to more than a quorum of the ATC communicating with each other on a particular project. So our attorneys have been, you did what? So we're having to take a very conservative posture and make sure that we aren't violating the Brown Act, and we're going to take baby steps in how we develop this to make sure that we aren't violating any laws. But we really are looking forward to it. Even with those parameters with the Brown Act, it is going to be much more efficient than what we went through before. And it's going to be that project ID number gets started the second people start putting information down. That project ID number will live with that project from creation to the very end, and that gives us that easy financial tracking all the way through. And they will have to select objectives right up front, so we know that the project is going to be aligned with what the MWPA is supposed to be doing. Measures of success in this realm has been really difficult for us to identify. So they're not built into the portal now, but we're continuing to refine what we think the measures of success will look like, and then they'll get added to the portal. And all the information feeds into our master spreadsheet. And when we are ready for the proposals to go public, we hit a button. All the pins or shape files show up on our map. The public has full access to it. We'll go through the final review with the advisory technical committee, bring it to operations for their review, then bring it to the board for review. And once we hit that public mode, then it's visible. It'll be visible on our website. And we're trying to create an easy to follow dashboard for the community to be able to watch these projects as they get implemented. So it's a really involved tool that we're creating. So we know there's going to be hiccups in it. And so we're going to work through the hiccups, and then we'll do everything we can to refine it as we go. But I am 99.99% confident we'll be better than last year's process. And I was going to close out today's report with grants, but grants coming in. We are in the process of writing 3 different grants now, and we think there could be 2 or 3 more grants that we're going to write to help support either our evacuation risk assessment, to support the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, to report. We're also looking for a potentially a forest health grant for eradication of invasive species that are also fire prone in all 5 of our geographical regions within the jurisdiction. And CAL FIRE keeps promising a grant that's geared towards home hardening. And we would like to, when that grant gets opened up, we would like to apply for that, bring that revenue into Marin so we can turn around and push that out through our grant programs to the residents for home hardening. And actually, I said I was going to close out with grants. One thing I do want to follow up is, and there's been a recent article in the IJ, and that's insurance cancellations or non-renewals. And we are including our 22-23 work plan, an initiative to work with legislators and insurers that if the simple way to describe it is if the MWPA evaluator goes out to and does a home evaluation, that homeowner does everything that we recommend, that perhaps we can push out a certificate that says this person did everything we asked, and have a partnership with the insurance companies that have a promise that they will not cancel or non-renew that insurance for that residence. There's a program running like that in Boulder, Colorado right now. So we hope to emulate it. And with that, I'll take any questions. Well, you're the chair, Lucy.
I should call upon myself. You mentioned the management analyst position and the vegetation specialist will be working together to shepherd projects on behalf of some of the local jurisdictions. And how is their time accounted for? Will it be taken off the budget for that jurisdiction's 20% allocation? Does this involve only core projects?
That's part of what we're working out with the operations committee. The management analyst piece is easy. They fit the administrative role, the administrative guidelines, and that will come out of our 10% that's going towards administrative budgeting. The VMS we see as an operational person, and we're still working out whether we carve the VMS salaries out of the top of the core budget before we allocate to the 5 zones, and then we track how many hours they work in each of the zones. Or if we are going to have one VMS that's going to support the Ross Valley, do they have a project that says this is the Ross Valley VMS and that is the funding for the position? Or do we build in hours of labor in each of the projects that turns around and funds that VMS? Public Works departments do it that way quite a bit, where each of their projects have allocated hours for the people that are within the Public Works department, and that's how they balance their funding. We're still working on the operations committee with that, because quite frankly, what I think is going to end up happening is some of the VMSs will be MWPA employees, and some will be embedded within their organization. But either way, that VMS will be able to reach out to the MWPA management analyst to put that contractor that we have on our vendor list on a core project. Whether or not they help for local projects, I think it just makes sense if they do, especially for the smaller agencies. And I think it'll be a small fraction of their time. But what's our end goal? Our end goal is to get activities out there working, whether it's in a core project or a local mitigation project.
So the accounting system remains to be worked out.
Correct. And that's where that project ID that I talked about that's going to get created at the beginning is going to be vital. And that's going to allow us to be able to track those costs as we go through.
Thank you. Let's start with Larry Chu. You have a question.
Yeah, Mark, you were talking about, collecting and creating metrics. I'm kind of thinking like 8 years down the road on this, at a point when we need to go back to the public for a renewal of Measure C funds. So if you're able to quantify or have some way of not only showing the what was done, but the impact of what would be done, that's going to resonate later on.
I totally agree. And that's why we're taking our time with the measures of success. We could have hit the easy button and we could have said, this is how many miles of roadway we treated. This is how many acres we treated. But treating along the Nacasha Reservoir, we could say we treated 5 miles of roadway along the Nacasha Reservoir. Is that the same as treating Edgewood in Mill Valley? No. So we want to make sure the metrics actually mean something and show that we actually did reduce risk in Marin. So that's why we've been taking it slow.
Thank you.
So, Michael, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. This is really a question that maybe reflects my ignorance, and so I'll apologize in advance for that. But I also sit on the Tamalpais Design Review Board as a member, and that's the sort of our little mini advisory board to the Planning Commission. And in about a week, we're going to have what promises to be a very interesting meeting to discuss the regional housing needs assessment for Southern Marin County. And I wonder whether, I guess my question is, as we're thinking about risk and the benefits of various treatments, are we thinking about what is in the planning documents for all the new housing is going to go? Because it'd be great if we plan to put it in safe places rather than ones where we have to deal with, figuring out a mitigation strategy later.
It's an excellent question. Excellent question. And the short answer is yes.
Oh, cool.
And I'll give an example with our evacuation ingress egress risk assessment. We have community development agency personnel in our evaluation team that helped write the RFP, that helped evaluate the proposal that came in to make sure it is aligned with their community development planning. And then I've also been involved in meetings with the CDA and county CDA and the individual towns, because the intersection of wildfire threat and the need for housing is an interesting intersection that's playing out in different ways throughout the state.
Sure. Thanks for the response. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Larry, you're next.
Thank you. Mark, I think, and this is sort of touching what Larry Chu was saying, because I was going in the same direction about years down the road. If we're able to really get this insurance certificate program going, I think that alone is an incentive for people to renew the measure. If they get something directly from it that saves them money, they're going to see how valuable this is. And in fact, I had brought up insurance when I was on the infrastructure committee in 2018 for MMWD, and no one had been really talking about it, but I started asking the question, if they update their infrastructure, will the insurance industry then look at Marin as safer? And they went and looked into that question, and for sure enough, the insurance industry does look at infrastructure among other factors when making determinations like this. So that's really good. And I think you touched upon this, Mark, I'll be very brief, which is hiring contractors. And in one of the meetings, you brought up that it'll be, forgive me if my wording's wrong, programmatic, where the contractor, you have a contractor, they're going to go out and do something, and there's already the rate, everything's set. And I think that's really going to be a money saving factor in everything. And if you can work with the other agencies like MMWD and open space perhaps, and you guys pool your resources, maybe even a greater savings all throughout the county on this kind of work.
I think the other benefit is that we can show that the county of Marin is a preferred contractor, and as more and more people want this work, they know that if we can create a relationship that the contractors know if they keep resources available in Marin, we'll put them to work.
Right.
And so I think that's another side of that benefit.
Steady work is magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they can plan out everything they need to do as well.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Max Perez.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, Max, I didn't see you.
No worries. Thanks, Mark. Great report. I was also going to comment, actually, Michael brought it up with the RENA numbers coming down to Marin and the housing elements being updated. I think, the more I think that the fire operations folks are involved in that conversation or thinking about how to respond to it, the better. I know I live in the incorporated area of Mill Valley, and I know Mill Valley's gotten, letters from one element of the state saying, build, and then another letter from CAL FIRE saying don't build, right? So it ends up, the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand, right? And so I think having local folks involved in that conversation is all for the better. One question I had in terms of the new positions, when do we expect them to start? And are we looking for folks who have prior fire district or fire management, emergency management experience, or more are these more kind of behind the scenes, especially for the analyst role?
The management analyst, I don't care if they know how to spell fire department. To be honest with you, I want someone that's efficient, especially in the flow of government business. You guys may have realized I'm rather impatient and like to get things done quickly. So as far as terms of hiring, I've already reached out to our recruitment folks at RGS so we can start the recruitment. In fact, the meeting was Thursday and I reached out to them on Friday. So I'm hoping to get the management analysts on board pretty quick. Optimistic view is that perhaps we can have one or two of the vegetation management specialists approved at our February meeting. And that's going to be an interesting question. We want them to have some fire background so they can scope the projects appropriately. But we also need project management skill set in there, environmental sciences skill set in there. And I really think that this position is going to be almost like the MWPA may turn into a little bit of a training ground. And I'm fine with that. We might get people recently out of school with a college degree that they want to get their feet into some type of fire prevention career or some type of environmental sciences career. We'll give them their first couple of years of exposure and they move on. I'm fine with that. So I think that's really how our target audiences are going to play out.
Great, thanks.
So do we have public comment on this, or is that?
Typically we'd have been, yeah.
Okay, are there any public comments?
At this time, is there anyone that would like to speak to the committee? Please raise your hand. I see none. Thank you.
Well, great. Then we can take the next moment to welcome Jennifer Howard to joining us. And Jennifer, would you give us a brief description of your background and introduce yourself for us?
Sure. So I live out in West Marin where I was raised, although I did a little detour through Silicon Valley where I raised my children. I had a long real estate career in Silicon Valley, but I'm currently back to my original passion of playing and teaching the cello, and very active in my West Marin community, which is a community on the Inverness Ridge of 110 homes. And so I sit on the FireWise committee, and I'm working with the Marin County Fire Department on some evacuation routes. And that was really the inspiration for looking at MWPA. I'm also active on the board that is working on maintaining 6 miles of roads, that takes up a fair bit of time, that and spending time in my garden or with my grandchild.
And before you leave it, I think you should tell them your fun fact.
Oh, is that up to me to tell them?
It is.
I was searching for what a fun fact was. And back in the early 80s, my first husband and my father and I started a company called Bioenergy. And at the time, we raised a sum of money to try to facilitate developing methane digesters on dairy farms. So we were somewhat successful. We did put together a couple of digesters, but the laws changed and I started having children and we were a little ahead of our time.
Sounds inspirational.
Thank you. I'm very, very excited to be here. This is all really interesting. I hope that when my term is over here, it's as fascinating as it is now. Thank you.
Glad you could join us.
Welcome.
So, so here we go. So we next move on to the minutes and go straight to the recommendation that we approve the minutes. Do I have, are there any requests or rather any corrections that anybody wants to make? Okay, then.
No corrections. I'll move to
Okay,
approve.
Second.
Second.
Yep.
Then show of hands, do we approve the minutes? Okay, I think that
Saves time.
I see our new folks are they're like
Yes,
I
go
figure
ahead
I should
and approve.
abstain because I wasn't there. So
Yeah.
Okay. So the next item then, since we've already transferred the chair, is to elect the vice chair of the committee. And I would like to know if any of you would like to throw your hat in the ring and step up to be vice chair for the next 6 months. Please speak. Oh, Rebecca. Rebecca, you're interested. Oh,
Rebecca, we need a speech.
Oh, seriously.
I'll move to nominate Rebecca as vice chair.
Yeah, I will second that. And if Rebecca hadn't volunteered, I was going to nominate her. So
Great.
Thank you both.
enthusiastic support.
So I guess show of hands and support the motion? Yes.
Yes.
I think it's unanimous.
Who made the first, Madam Chair?
I think it was Max Perret and
Max.
then
Thank you.
Pat Randolph.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Welcome to the hot
No. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we
That was a tough battle.
Better me than
Everyone
you
else
then.
nominating themselves.
we look forward to using your research skills to their fullest extent.
Oh, good. That's a good one. Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on to the update policies and procedures, item 7C. And I wanted to frame this a little bit. We have lots and lots of things going on in this area. We've got our policies and procedures that we were halfway through from our last meeting. And then we gained the opportunity to start talking to the various committees which I used, and there's been some concern that that wasn't done correctly. And then in the soup as I am, I then did a Marine Voice piece, and there's been some discussion about that. And we also have issues to discuss about how we communicate with the board and other officers when we're trying to triangulate facts for our report. And it struck me that there are so many issues that we are thinking through right now that it makes that we need to sort of take a step back and appoint a subcommittee. But before we do that, at subcommittee to think through quite a number of the issues. And Rebecca, remind me, because one of the issues that you want to bring up is embedded in there somewhere. So first of all, let's begin with the, I don't know if you've all had a chance to read the document called Public Comments while on the COC. And that's divided into two sections, one concerning the comments to the operations committee, for example, but I think it's useful as a sort of learning tool. I think it'll apply to the other committees depending on how we what we think. And then the other half of it is to do with the marine voice piece. So, but let's start with a discussion on the comments to the operations committee. Does anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share? Larry Chu.
Yeah, I think, since I had drafted the last set of policies and procedures for you to review, really what it comes down to is getting clarification on what somebody is endorsed by the rest of the committee to be able to take up or ask of whatever committee that they're on the standing agenda for. And ultimately, we all need to use our own best judgment to ensure that whatever it is we do take in front of any of the standing committees, that we do so in an oversight capacity as opposed to one of advocacy, where we may be representing the group or zone that we've been appointed by. So this isn't so much as to raise it for a level of discussion, but setting the general framework for how this subcommittee will go back and the outstanding question that I believe still exists.
So just to paraphrase, to make sure I understand it, that when addressing any of the committees, that we would be speaking on our own behalf, but as such, obviously not a fully endorsed opinion of the COC until later. But we would need to be very careful that we were not representing our constituency when we asked that question, and that we were more generally asking sort of broader questions.
Well, according to our policies and procedures, we would need an endorsement of the full committee in order to bring an issue before them. But if a matter comes up as a part of that discussion, when we say represent, I have a specific idea of what represent means, because I've been on the other side of it, where we've appointed, citizens to these types of boards. But the place where we need some clarification is that a zone is not likely to need quote unquote representation because a person already exists on the board who is the elected member of each of the different communities that comprise that zone. But if, for example, Larry, who wears the environmental hat, or Michael, who's part of, appointed by a civic group, when we talk about represent, what does that mean? And I think there's a clear differentiation between taking an oversight issue with the lens coming from the group that you've been appointed by, versus taking an issue where you are advocating for a change of position or something related to a public policy matter, which is actually the board's role and not the COC's role.
Then that raises the question, though, to me, and I think Rebecca had asked this too, which is whether or not that you're suggesting that consideration applies when we're talking to the other committees. But how does it apply when on our own committee? How do we speak in the voice of an environmental group, or do we not? I mean, that's Rebecca?
Before we get too far down this track,
yeah,
nowhere in the JPA or Measure C does it say or represent.
Yes.
Yeah.
What it says is a person from each of these will be on the COC, be appointed to be on the COC. My interpretation of that is, once the people are there, once the board has said, here's a person from West Marin, here's a person from a civic group, here's a person from fire. Our background disappears as far as COC goes. We don't represent, I don't represent Novato. I happen to be living in it. And they happen to select me to say, you're living in it, be on the COC. I think what they had in mind was, we are agnostic to any of that once we're members of the COC. The only reason to have selected people that way is to make sure that there is somebody on the COC from all of the areas of Marin.
Mark.
I agree with Rebecca 100%. I think the goal was to create a diversity of perspectives.
Yeah.
And then that creates that, and then like Rebecca said, you come in, now you're a group, but now you all have this different perspective that you can apply, and you can think from that perspective.
Max.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what Rebecca and Mark said. I mean, hopefully all of us are environmental, care about fire, are civically minded, and care about the taxpayers, right? So, I think, hopefully we come with many different hats or many different perspectives, and we bring them. And I think the overall goal of it is to have some balance in terms of ensuring that, at the bare minimum, someone comes with some sort of background, whether it's where they live or the sort of outside MWPA activities that they're involved in.
And Larry, are you thinking that a person from say a person from Nevada, although I can't imagine Nevada, Lucy, I'm going to pick on you, a person representing, or not representing, a person who was selected as coming from a fire-ish background onto the COC, do you think that person needs to think about recusing themselves if the issue that we are looking at has to do with, for a fire safe Marin, for example?
Well, to preface my answer, and I totally agree with what Max has said, which is kind of the path I was going down. So, it directed you into that conversation. Is that the word we've been using frequently within our discussions has been represent.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to get away from. So your point was made. But to answer your question, that's why we had that other clause put in, where, the group would have to, a person who has another affiliation may have a perceived conflict of interest, even if it's not financial, as defined by the Fair Political Practices Commission. But, if we got into a situation where we're talking about something and a person, I don't know, the only example I can think of right now, unfortunately, is Larry. I'm not trying to throw you, under the bus or anything, but if there was an environmental issue where he has also been a spokesperson for another group, then he may disclose that. And then we could discuss it and just say, we don't believe there's a conflict of interest. And I really don't think that any of us would ever cross into that realm, because again, we are not making policy. So then there's no advocacy. So there would be no conflict.
Harry.
Just super brief. As soon as I came on here, I felt that the role was to represent the community as a whole, period.
Good. Does anyone else want to say anything? So, Larry Chu. Oh, yes, Michael.
I just say, this issue has come up for me before in various roles that I've served. And I think it's worked well. I mean, so one thing is say, I totally agree with the sense that once we're appointed, we're serving all of Marin, and our role is not to advocate for well, I live in Tam Valley. I'm not going to be like, we need to spend the money in Tam Valley, like the heck with Ross, you know, that's not the job. And I also think that in terms of, you know, perceived conflicts, you know, when we have public speaking or if we speak in a public fashion, I think it's adequate if it's relevant to identify, you know, to say, you know, I sit on the Citizens Oversight Committee and the views I'm about to express are my own personal views and not those of the Oversight Committee or the MWPA, and just make that clear.
So what you're recommending is so we're moving on to the second example in the policies and procedures where we had a public marine voice piece, and part of the concerns that were raised was that although the piece did identify who I was speaking on behalf of, it did not specifically say, this is not the opinion of the COC. And so is it your recommendation that that should be a specific formula that we should employ under all circumstances?
Well, you know, that's been the practice on boards that I've sat on. I've never sat on a COC before. And I think it's a little bit different because we're not in a decision-making role. I don't think we're subject to Fair Political Practices Act. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but you know, we're not. I don't think you have to file a Form 700 to sit on the COC.
You
do. Oh, okay. I should file my Form 700.
You'll be getting an email in February for that.
Okay, sounds good. But yeah, I think it's worked well. Just, and it doesn't have to necessarily be. If you're speaking to an issue that is relevant to the work, just say this is my own personal viewpoint, and not the views of whatever body I'm sitting on that's relevant to that issue. So, like in the past, I've been interviewed to talk about the wildfire fund, and that's just, you know, you just have to lead with that and say, you know, I'm on the catastrophe council, or when I was on the wildfire commission, but you know, these are my views, not the views of the commission, not the view of the council. And that has worked okay. And I certainly see it's common practice in the energy space. I work with a lot of people who sit on the California ISO and they follow similar practice.
So
how explicit do you want the disclaimer to be? You know, I mean, for instance, in this opinion piece that was in the IJ, 4 different affiliations were mentioned. Lucy wrote it, specifically said she was only speaking to 2 of them, but at the bottom there was a list of her credentials, and there were like 4 different things: practicing attorney, costs, CWP, you know, and COC. But the big brouhaha here is, or at least I hope it's not, is whether she explicitly issued a disclaimer because of the COC, as opposed to none of the other things. Okay. At what point does disclaimer? Did she have to disclaim that she wasn't speaking for any of those organizations in the body of her work, or in this case, she just put a bunch of credentials down at the bottom? The editor put them down there.
Yeah, well, that's the hard part, is when you're dealing with the newspaper, you don't always have control over this stuff. But I think, I think, you know, all we can do is make our best efforts and be this is just me talking, but I sort of think you have to make your best effort, and then sometimes it's not going to work because it's going to hit the editorial, you know, wood chipper, and you may not even get that into the piece, but we can all try, you know. And
well, in her case, I mean, she's very specific about for which group she was speaking. Okay, there was this, but down at the bottom, and I'm just saying, if that's specific there, what do you need to also be specific again? A reasonable person draws the inference, of course, that this is exactly that she's only speaking for 2 groups. Mentioning them down at the bottom is a credential. There's no inference to draw on there. A reasonable person wouldn't. So that's one. I mean, let's not get. We're trying to define this too carefully, is all I'm saying. You know, just reasonable standards are what I think should be applied.
Larry Chu, you had your hand up for a long time.
Yeah, I think you would have to treat it situationally. I personally would never write anything associated with the MWPA because I don't think the public can separate the different hats that I wear. You know, I can preface it and say, well, I'm not speaking for X, but I think by and large, people view me in the totality of the different things that I do. So that's just me. But I think what's more important for anybody that writes is whether they have to look at the downstream impacts. And in this case, if there was anything that potentially could have been a problem, say, for example, for the MWPA board, is that we have a COC member writing in advocacy for a political measure that's about to go on the ballot. And MWPA as an organization is not allowed to do political advocacy.
Oh, so you think that in a certain way it could have been seen as an indirect move on MWPA's part to.
Well, you know, as Michael was saying, it's hard to know how people read into that. So, you know, sometimes you need to be cautious. And you know, looking at it from the MWPA board members, you know, I don't think they all agree that what you might have suggested was a good idea either. You know,
You mean substantively, or are you talking about the process of saying something? Which is it?
the substance of it.
So disagree, making a statement about measure A, all right, is somehow going to create a negative inference on the MWPA?
Not on the MWPA, but, you know, I don't know if you would get total consensus on whether they would endorse a statement like that.
It's really none of their business, is it?
Well, it is if you're
If it's
associated
her
with
right
the
to, I mean, how it's
MWPA.
her. So we're all supposed to just sit back and not comment on anything in the public sector because of this?
Well, you
Because it
know,
might have a tangential effect on the board of directors?
well, I've
Sorry.
stated it before, where it just depends on the culture of the organization. City of Larkspur took a written statement by resolution, basically saying that, you know, you shouldn't do these things. You can't prohibit somebody's First Amendment rights, but at least you have some general framework that creates a certain conduct that you're willing to agree to, at least in concept. And that's what we're discussing here.
Larry Minikes, you've had your hand up for a long time.
Yeah, thank you. I can kind of speak to this because I've been quoted since the early 90s in the paper, and I've had every sort of thing you can imagine, which are misquotes and taken out of context and given to the wrong groups and given to the right groups. And I've learned over time, particularly when writing a piece, it is the writer's responsibility to make the editor aware of whom you're speaking to. And you can't mix organizations in. You have to be extremely specific. And where Kingston is coming up with, can I talk about, that's okay if you're writing a sort of I don't want to call it a fluff piece, but a piece that's more of educational. This was more along political lines. And when you're writing a political piece about a measure, you are only writing for that group. You cannot, under any circumstances, mix in other groups. And I've learned this, I practice this. Every time I write something, it's very, very clear on whose behalf I'm writing. And when I'm quoted in the paper, most of the time I'm a member of the board, but it doesn't say that I'm speaking on behalf of the board. And it's only MCL. And I make sure that when I'm speaking to the reporter, he knows which organization I'm speaking on behalf of, you know, because I do wear so many hats, like many of us do. And that's my feeling here is you have to be clear and specific and know if you're writing a piece that has any political inferences, you have to be specific only to the group or groups that you are writing for. You cannot say I'm also associated with, because the public cannot separate that. That's the problem. Thank you.
Larry, you make comments in the IJ after letters all the time, particularly about MMWD. I mean, are you
Sure.
speaking just for yourself? Or are you speaking for MCL? Or are you on any committees? I think you are, or committee for MMWD. I mean, are you not in some
Yeah.
advisory?
It says Larry Minikis.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
also, when I make an
But we all
comment,
know we all know who you
Right.
are. I'm saying,
Right.
is it inference that you're speaking for one of your various groups there too as well?
I'm speaking from my knowledge of all the work that I've been doing and all the involvement I've had these years. And so I'm just speaking from knowledge. I'm not speaking,
Okay.
if I'm speaking on behalf of MCO or something, I'm going to say so. If I'm speaking as a member of some subcommittee of MMWD or whatever, I will say so, but I'm always speaking for myself.
But that's what Lucy was doing. She was speaking. She was very specific about the group she was speaking for. Okay.
Okay, I said where you draw the line on that. Okay.
So I think that this merits more thought, and I think that by appointing or having a subcommittee appointed to work on this and to think through this issue and the triangulation of fact issue, the communications in general, and finishing up the policies and procedures from where we were last time, maybe using that to build out a structure that can cover most of the situations. I'm sure we're going to encounter something or other that we hadn't anticipated, but if we can give some overall thought to principles, then we can start to fill in procedures. So I would like to take any volunteers to sit on the subcommittee with the request that I also be given a space on the subcommittee because I've been so intimately involved in all the procedures so far. So who else would like to serve on this? Rebecca, Max. So that's 3. Anyone else? Larry?
Yeah, if you need a fourth, I'll be on it, but if somebody else wants to be on it, I'll defer since, you and I worked on a lot of the policies and your voice is already there.
Okay. And anyone else?
Larry, only if you're too busy. Otherwise,
No, wait a second. If Larry Minikis is on there, I want to be on there. Okay. All right. Jesus. I think both of us. I think both of us should not be on there.
we're
That's
not
to be
competing
honest.
with each other, Kingston.
Oh, but we will be contesting. All right, and we will always do that. And I'm just saying, better if both of us are not on there. Okay. That's what.
I think we already have a quorum, just under a quorum.
And I don't want to be on there, but I would hope that when the group that works on this, number 10 on that list that talks about not communicating with members of the board, and I happen to have a personal friend who's a member of the board, and the way it's written now, it sounds almost like I have to end my friendship. So if somebody could word that very carefully, where it's just referring to communicating about MWPA business or policies or whatever, so that it's clear that one can speak to one's friends.
Okay. So yes, these are, I think we really need to do some big thinking and then some small wordsmithing
Yes.
to make sure that we've got it well thought through and expressed. So, okay, so now we move on to public comment on this?
And I just wanted to make sure if you could reiterate who's going to be on that committee.
Okay, so I, Lucy Dilworth, Max Perret, Rebecca Suggs, and Larry Chu.
Larry Chu. Okay, got him. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank
Oh,
you.
I thought Kingston or Larry wanted to be on there instead.
Well,
No.
Then we would be well over a quorum.
But then,
Yeah.
okay, because they both wanted to be on it if one or the
No.
other was.
No.
And if a couple of us drop dead, then they can be on.
Okay.
that's cheerful, yes. Okay.
Jesus, Larry. We haven't smelled the coffee.
So,
I'll just say I appreciate both of your comments on the IJ articles. I always read the comments, and both of you are probably the only people who put your real names, which I really appreciate. So.
Thank you, Max. Really, I really wonder sometimes, why don't you people just put your names? You seem to know what you're talking about. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
let's move to public comment, please.
At this time, is there any public that would like to speak on this item? Please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item that we're going to move on to are the committee reports. And this is where we come to pretty much the substance of what we're going to be saying in our report. So it's been divided into 3 separate categories from transparency, finance, and work plan. And I hope you've all had an opportunity to review them, because this is really going to be, it's not in final form because we're going to reorganize it, smooth it, but and sort of rework it into a different kind of template. But let's begin with the I guess it's the Transparency Committee report. Have any of you any comments or concerns that you'd like to raise? I see Pat, you have your hand up.
So just some very minor things, and I don't know who wrote this, but it's in general very well written. But in the second paragraph, the last line where it says prevent forest devastation, I think we really mean wildfire devastation, because at least I'm concerned about a coffee park or a paradise, not a forest fire off somewhere in the distance.
Okay.
The third bullet point under the second paragraph where it talks about Measure C, I think that should also include the JPA agreement, because those are our founding documents, and we want to be in compliance with both of those, not just one. And in the list of meetings, Operations Committee was left out.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah, and I think we definitely want that. And the final one is a very minor thing under findings. It says in the first line, it says all the meetings were held in. So
Thank you.
there's an extra in there.
Thank
So
you. Got it.
otherwise, very good.
Thank you.
Larry Miller, please.
Yeah, actually, to Pat's very first comment, I was just going to say, as a matter of protocol, in the future, when we do these reports, the members of the committee should be listed at the end, just so it answers that exact thing.
Okay.
So you know who worked on it. And
All right.
for the public record, I'd like to say that Kingston and I both sat on this committee, and we worked very, very well together. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
You're welcome.
We'll work it out. That's all right.
Okay, Mark.
I do have, and Kingston, I'm sorry I didn't catch this when you emailed it in, but on page 2, number 3, ensuring funding compliance for MWPA projects, we actually do have the attestations in the 2021 work plans for the local projects. They're calling it was called a declaration. So if you look at the 2020-2021 work plan and you pull up the project proposal sheets, the third category is declarations. And one of the examples I give is this expands and accelerates an existing limited term program. Without MWPA, this program would have been eliminated, reduced due to COVID-19 or other budgetary challenges. And then other project proposals have similar declarations saying that it's not supplanting.
Who are they signed by?
They're submitted by the proposals, are not signed.
Not signed. Well,
There's
that's not
nowhere,
real-
there's nowhere in the JPA language that says it has to be signed. There has to be. They have to.
I thought next year it was discussed that it would have to be attested by a city manager as well as the president of the board or
That
whatever.
was discussion. That was discussion of the COC. That is not a decision of the board.
No, I thought it was discussion at the MWPA level. I'm
No.
sorry.
No.
So next year, and Rebecca's the one that sort of put me onto this. So declarations are going to be the same as they are this year.
There,
No signatures.
exactly. It'll be similar. It'll be some type of attestation that they are not supplanting funds.
Okay, we'll work it out. Okay.
All right.
Let me say Lucy is on the committee as well. Lucy, I didn't mean to leave you out of that. Forgive me. That was my fault. My bad.
Not a problem.
I can get that. That's- Lucy, Stephen.
So do we take public comment on this, and then each of the subsections of, then do we take public comment now on this item?
Larry, you have your hand up, Larry?
Oh,
I was
sorry.
going to mention that Larry Chu has his hands up, but
Sorry, Larry.
the way the agenda is lined out, you probably should take public comment by each individual
Okay.
document.
Okay.
Good, thank you. All right. So Larry Chu.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as Mark. The only question I had about our discussion as a matter of clarification. One of the things that we had discussed in the past was the inability to determine if a local agency with their local distribution were staying within compliance of, Measure C funds. So we don't plan on auditing them as part of the COC process or reviewing their projects as part of the COC process. So we wanted to add a level of accountability. And that would mean that somebody in a leadership capacity or fiduciary capacity would have to sign off on it. Now, although that hasn't been approved by the board, we can still make it as a recommendation.
Thank you, Larry.
That's a very good point, Larry. Rebecca?
Except that, so you just said that we don't plan on reviewing the projects at the local level, the 20%, the local projects. Is that what you said, Larry?
No, I'm saying that it would be very onerous for us to do the review of the authority and then also have to go to 17 agencies and look at their 20%.
Make sure that they're supplementing an existing program. We wouldn't be, we wouldn't have the accounting ability to go and double check that their numbers are right.
Right. Okay. So it's the money part that, and is it, yes. Okay. Got that.
Money and work plan. Because the projects also have to be in alignment with Measure C's purposes for funding.
So we are looking at work plans.
No, I don't know how other people feel about it, but I'm trying to avoid having to review 17 other local agencies.
Well, I think that's exactly right. That's why we'd like somebody to be accountable and to make that declaration. But I think, Rebecca, what would be complicated for us would be, so San Anselmo has a program on vegetation management, and it can't be supplanted by MWPA funds. So but how much of a review of San Anselmo's expenditure and work plans would we need to do? If we had the attestation, we could just move ahead and know that it was supplemental rather than replacing. So that's what I think, it makes our life simpler.
Yes. So we are looking at the work plans at the local level.
Yes.
To say, do they fit in with what they should be doing? What MWPA says, this is what we do. We're looking at them for that. But the attestation would take the place of us having to look at the financial part of it and saying, we're not supplanting, this project isn't supplanting something that's already should be done by the local agency. I'm not getting all of that out right. And I think it needs to be talked about.
I think that was right, but I think that this is, this, I think this is in our documentation, making this recommendation, and I think we'll have to be very clear about what we're asking for and why we're asking for it. So that will go into the next draft, I think, of the report and make sure everybody's comfortable with what we're asking and see whether the MWPA.
I'm looking at I'm looking at the second to last paragraph in the work plan report, and this is what I think is causing the confusion. It says, after discussing the matter, the committee, work plan committee, concluded that an anonymous unsworn declaration did not comply with the JPA's requirement that the member agency certify, in quotes, that the requirement was met. Is that the exact language? I mean, are we making a finding that we can't support, or what?
Well, I think we're going to have to work on that and make sure that we're very precise and that we understand what we're asking and why we're asking for it. And so we'll word that very carefully. So, okay, so we don't want to get ahead to that one anyway. Right. We're still working on the transparency report. Anyone else have any comments? Oh, Larry.
Yeah, thank you. Rebecca, I think where you're trying to go is to make sure that there's oversight, to make sure that there's checks and balances at the local level. And I just want to, for the public record, for people to recognize that you have one of the organizations out there is FERN. And FERN is also looking very, very closely at the local level at work plans. So there's other public eyes on this, and just for informational, I think it's important to understand that it's not just the COC, but there are other groups that are very interested in the work plans as well. Thank you.
And my comment is more from a part of what we are chartered to do is to look at work plans, and then we also give feedback to the board. So how do we do that if we don't look at the work plans? We can't. We need to look at the work plans. Now, whether or not the attestation issue, I'm less concerned about that part of it. Well, that's not true either. I'm going to stop speaking now because we're going to come back and talk about this later.
All right. So let's move to public comment.
This time, is there anyone in the public that would wish to speak to the committee on this item? Please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised at this time. Thank you.
Off the hook.
So we now move on to the financial committee report. And Larry, do you want to give us a preamble to what's going on there? Or,
yeah, just as a matter of clarification, you'll see that in the report there are things in black colored text and things in red colored text. The things in red colored text are edits that were made the morning of the agenda packet going out. So those are the things that Mark at the time did not have a chance to review in terms of the specific language, because one of the things that his review is for is that there is accuracy in the statement. So, the only thing that's left outstanding at this point is the discussion about the vegetation management and the 80% that is supposed to be spent within each zone. And that still needs to be reconciled to some degree, because there's a timing issue right now in that the authority may make payments or accrue for expenses, but they're tracking it as a project, but you have a definitive place where you need to draw a line, and that's the end of the fiscal year. So some of the money has been spent beyond the fiscal year, and the project is still ongoing. So we need to be able to at least reconcile that at a snapshot in time, and then be able to just make a simple statement that says, if the 80% hasn't been spent in each zone as it's required by Measure C, you still have a 5-year period in which that can true up. So it's not anything bad or reflects badly on a person or the program itself, but just to have the proper understanding that, it may not be necessary to be exact, at a particular point in time, which in our case is the end of the fiscal year.
So Mark, do you want to comment?
Yeah,
on that?
if I may give a specific example, chipping season does not align well with fiscal year. And when I asked Fire Safe, because Fire Safe Marin has since they were managing chipper days for us, has a very detailed record of where the pickups were and how much money was spent in each of the geographical regions. When I asked for the data, they gave me calendar year 2020. So that left a 6-month hole in our data. So I have reached back to them, and they're going to fill in the data hole for us so that we get January 1 through June 30 of 2021 to fill in that fiscal hole. So the data will be much more complete very soon. I think the red flag we get signed project, we got the data we needed. And for right or wrong, the formula that we came up with, how public education is being pushed out and how public education monies are being spent in the zones. Well, when they were online forums, it's hard to identify where the public education was actually going. So for right or wrong, we're applying to percent population for the communities, unless it was some of the focused forums like we had for each of the zones. So we had I'll use Santa Fe as an example, where Quinn Gardner and her team were with the fire chief and had that forum. We can apply that one directly to the Santa Fe zone, and we had one for each of the zones, so we know we met that guideline. That's what I'm looking forward to this year, as our current fiscal year. Our project tracking by project got much more detailed, and you'll literally be able to see in the expenditures. Let's make up a number, $22,556.23 was spent on this project number, and it literally will tell you exactly where it was.
Yeah, so just to sum it all up, the report is broken down into 2 sections. One, did the authority meet its financial metrics? And the second is more of a governance question, which is, what kind of financial policies did they adopt for the year, and which ones are still outstanding? You'll notice in this report there are no recommendations at this point, and Kingston and I still need to go back and review those. I think at most, if there's any recommendation at all, we may be asking them to just complete the review and approval of their policies. And on the financial side, if we are missing a level of detail that doesn't allow us to tie out, specific expenditures with a project, Mark has just addressed that, with his last comment. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
And if I can add one more thing, Larry, you mentioned that the red items were items that I hadn't been able to review. I could tell you that I agree with all of the red items that you have in here. With the one caveat that we're giving you the missing data for the 80% as far as the rest of the chipper day second half of the fiscal.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I know you emailed me on that, but yes, correct.
Pat, did you have a question?
Not real. I think my point got made that that 80% is over a 5-year period. So it doesn't have to be each year. And to me, that's a little bit contrary to the original point of MWPA of we look at the county as a whole rather than looking at the parochial interest. And I'm driven crazy by the language that whoever originally wrote this and used vegetation management to I think they meant it to apply to the entire Corps because we don't have a separate vegetation management. But it's just whoever the lawyers were with the language on this didn't make it as clear as it should have been. But I think you have wisely said that it's a term of art that's meant to apply to all the Corps funds and not just vegetation management.
And if I can expand on that, the reason why I think that's a legitimate argument, and I'll use grants as an example, grants are likely to have vegetation management involved in them. And so it's hard to separate that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, Larry.
Yeah, just as a matter of closing, again, Kingston and I will get the language together that we need, but one of the things that we have to be aware of in the future, as you saw that there was a large excess above between income and expenditures. There will be periods of time, the first year was about building reserves for working capital, but there will be other times when you need to accumulate enough cash in order to have it for projects that are going to cost a lot more. And much to Pat's point about the way something is written, we would probably want to look at the intent of what it was meant for, and the intent is to have these metrics applied against the expenditures, not the budget. So the budget in and of itself can also be ambiguous because are you talking about your revenue or are you talking about your expenses? So, those are qualitative discussions we might want to put in there. But I think we have enough for this year to wrap up the report after we get the 80% language cleaned up.
So do we move? Oh, Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca, and then Larry Minikis.
You're muted, Rebecca.
And all I was saying was, Larry, you were ahead of me in line.
Oh, no, go ahead. You're.
So Larry Chu, we may want to put an information or an educational segment of about 15 minutes for you to explain what you were just saying about the difference between budget and expense and how we apply stuff. I thought I understood those terms and I've taken a few courses, but I don't get it. So maybe you could talk at some point, not today, about some of that in general. And I don't know if maybe nobody else has the problem. It's only me, then I'll call you.
I can say that I have learned so much by answering, working through the questions Larry has asked me and me having to ask questions back to him to help define some of his questions. So you're not alone.
Yeah, and maybe for a separate session, I can also give you some assurances as to how I tied out the numbers without doing an audit. The audit is not our job.
Yeah.
I can at least give you the assurances that the numbers are represented properly.
So I just want to jump in and say, speaking of the audit, is there any
February.
time? What was that?
February was the last update I got.
Okay.
Keep promising. All right.
I'm not writing it, so.
Yeah, right.
Larry?
Well, I want to first thank Kingston and Larry. I think you guys both wrote this report. It's just very comprehensive and appreciate the clarity in it. And speaking to what Larry said, where you can accrue funds so you don't have to spend them all in 1 year makes so much sense, because we've always heard about government agencies that have this money and then they just throw it at something because it goes away otherwise. And so that is avoided. And one good example is this upcoming Ross Valley project, which I understand is going to require 7 different districts to be involved. So that's a huge project. So I could understand what you're saying, Larry, about accruing funds for a large project. That is an example of one, I believe, Mark. That is where you would do something like that. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's move to, Mark, did you have something else to say?
No, just it was flippant and not necessary. Just all right, I'll say it so you guys aren't wondering. As a government employee, I hated end of budget year spending because it made absolutely no sense. And I would prefer to focus our money on things that are valuable rather than, oh, we have to spend it.
It was very wise to do things this way, very wise.
Okay, so do we have any public comment?
At this time, anybody wishing to speak on this item to the committee, please raise your hands. Seeing no hands raised at this time, thank you.
So then we move on to the work plan subcommittee report. And Rebecca, do you want to give any kind of overview or make any comments?
I'll say that there are sections. So the first several paragraphs are background information, not necessarily just for our report, but for the entire annual report. These are founding document information that applies to what's in our annual report, like why we're doing it and what it covers. And then in the middle, where it starts Citizens Oversight Committee report, that this is our section of the annual report. So this is the work plans committee report. And then at the bottom, there's a, watch her going through all of this. Goodness sakes, this is much longer than I thought. At the end of our report, we made some general conclusions and lessons learned. Again, this is from us having gone through the work plans, but it isn't necessarily all just about work plans. So our goals were met, meaning projects were consistent with definitions, funds were managed appropriately, and what we could see is people were using open government practices and they were demonstrating good behavior. Then we actually made some other broader views of what we found. This could be construed as our recommendations, what to do for making the work plans better. But some of it is more than that. Some of it is just in general what the COC found in our work for that first year. That's the background. Oh, and we did discover a big thing. On our committee, we had 4 people who happened to all be from different regions. So we chose to divide up the work by region. We don't recommend you ever do that again. A, there were only 4 of us and there are 5 regions. And B, we discovered that Fire Safe Marin needed to be represented as well. A lot of work they do that's not by region. So we found some other things about how we structured doing the work that we wouldn't do again. And we talk a little bit about that, but again, that's not a work plan recommendation.
I have a quick question, which is on the final pages, some of the recommendations have an asterisk, and I'm trying to figure out if that is in reference to something else or is it just a separation for each comment?
It's a separation. So anything that's not, so for example, where it starts with designated time in MWPA operations, that's one recommendation thing, or one finding, what did I call them? Conclusions, that too. Conclusions and lessons learned. So there's one lesson learned or conclusion. Then the next one is COC to begin its review of work plans, that, and then blah, blah, blah. That blah, blah, blah is about that star above it.
So we can, this is the sort of thing we can do formatting, and so you can recognize
Yeah.
points or whatever.
Yeah. The expert about formatting can do that.
So there was one of your recommendations, which I hadn't noticed before, but I think is a very interesting one. And obviously it applies to when Measure C gets renewed, because it's not currently in the description of how funds are spent. But that you were talking about the disadvantages that West Marin suffers because it's got such low population, and that it seems that they have a lot of work to be done and less funds than the other zones. So that was an interesting point.
And Pat, you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, and I realized as I was reading that over today that is factually inaccurate. The point is still well taken, but the funds aren't divided up by population. But Rebecca and I spent some time today looking at Measure C and how non-residential properties are taxed, so that it does give West Marin considerably less money, and particularly some of those very small agencies, although like Mere Beach is actually in Southern Marin rather than in West Marin, which seems a little bit strange. But and one comment, I worked on this with Rebecca and Carolyn before she left, and I would concur that we would never do it again by zone. But I think that's one thing that we're going to need to spend a little bit of time making the zones, the information consistent across them, because it was done by different people. They don't all look the same, and for a final report, they should all look the same.
So
that's formatting more than anything.
But I also think that, and this applies to the subcommittee, those of us who are on the report writing subcommittee,
yes,
we will, in fact, be rearranging recommendations, obviously formatting and subheadings, but we might also come back and say, you covered these 3 points here, but you didn't follow up in the next section, and come back to the other committees just to double check and we can fill in something to make it uniform. Larry.
Yeah, I just want to add another complication to West Marin that Ann Krelock recently brought up, which is it's very difficult to do work out there with the Coastal Commission. There's far more requirements and it makes it very expensive. So the money that does go out there isn't even going to go as far because of the requirements.
Yeah. You may see a recommendation from me to perhaps increase the fund. We have the 80%. It's 80%. It's not 100% that has to be spent where the monies are, the revenue is created. So perhaps we and I say super fund, but not huge. We decrease the target for some of our Central Marin zones in order to create more budget space in West Marin so that we can handle those increased compliance costs.
So anybody else with any comments about this, the work plan?
Michael Wara has his hand up.
I just have a quick comment about the West Marin issue. And that is just to note that there's a history of fires that start in West Marin, but don't stay in West Marin. And, anybody who knows the history in the water district knows that. And so I think there's a decent argument to be made that spending in West Marin accrues to the benefit of communities that are close to the mountain in Eastern Marin.
Yeah.
And it may not even be the fire that is spreading from West Marin to the core, the 101 corridor. If a fire is allowed to grow to 10,000 acres, maybe it's not even threatening homes in West Marin. That's a tremendous resource draw. Then those resources are not available to respond to the new incident that is on the foothills of Mount Tam and Kent Woodlands.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very interesting recommendation.
That sounds like a special something to go to MWPA meeting, board, operations committee, somebody, finance committee, I guess.
Well, you mean implementing this right now? Could it be implemented right now, or does it have to wait for the renewal? Mark, do you think?
Well, the 80% would have to wait for the renewal. The increasing if I remember the language properly, increasing D-space money and decreasing core money, the board can vote on that. The 80% would have to go to the renewal. However, I do think that if we set the targets different for each of the zones, I think we'll get ample money over to the West Marin in order to accomplish our goal.
Anybody else have any comments? Okay, moving to public comment.
Is there anyone in the public wishing to speak on this item? Please raise your hand at this time. Seeing none, thank you.
So we're moving on to information items. Does anyone have anything that they would like to share? Laurie, do you have something?
Yes, this has not probably been brought to the committee, but in September of 2021, AB 361 changed from its original state to have meetings every 30 days and has to be approved every 30 days. But with that, specific requirements came about in September. And one of the requirements is every time you take a vote, it has to be voted by roll call vote. So going forward, when we do vote, if we could do a roll call vote, because it's the requirement of the Brown Act as of September.
Okay.
Okay, just for your information. Thank you.
No, appreciate knowing that.
See what happens when we bring on a real, like a professional instead of me winging it.
Yeah, there's a downside to everything, isn't there?
I ignored it. I knew the rule, but
It's been a whole year.
Shame on you, Larry.
yeah, but the thing is,
Jesus.
they were issues of substance, like adjourning.
Right.
So moving on to committee members' request regarding future agenda items. Does anybody want something? Oh, Pat.
I would like as soon as, two things. As soon as we get through this, I think right away we need to talk about process for next year, because I think we could have been much more efficient in the way that we have done this year, and we need to define process a little bit more. And I think the question has been answered, but I before today's discussion, I had really had a question about the role of geographic area reps. And I think this has been answered, but maybe it could be answered a little bit more fully in a future meeting of just what is expected of each of us, because I have been concerned about representing San Rafael, and it sounds like that's not really what my role is at all.
I think that'll be addressed in the subcommittee deliberations, and we'll come up with something for that.
Good.
And maybe make a presentation from that subcommittee on that topic. Kingston.
Yeah, well, we have two new members. and they're not on any committees.
Oh, that's a point.
I
Whoa.
thought I'd just sort of put them in harness as quickly as possible. If not the next meeting, maybe right now, anything you're interested in.
Maybe they haven't had a chance to really think about it.
That's fine.
Yeah, give them an
Jennifer.
opportunity.
No, Jennifer.
You're muted.
No, I realize. I was just going to say, I was hoping to spend a couple of meetings observing and absorbing before I volunteered for anything. But
Okay.
anybody who, as you get to know me, if you want to assign me, I'm open to that. Can I just say something as I'm thinking about this geographical area, as we're thinking about it? It seems to me that rather than representing my area is being represented as part of sort of, I can't think of exactly the right word, but as part of being viewed as a group with integrity and the various areas being represented. I'm not sure that makes any sense to anybody, but that's kind of how I'm trying to think about it. Thanks.
Pat, did you have something? Yeah.
No, I was just thinking for Jennifer and Michael, if they need to be assigned committees to observe at this point in time, since we all have, or whether maybe they just pick and choose of the committees that we regularly observe. And maybe they want to take a little bit longer to figure
That's
out
fine.
which ones it is.
Why don't they talk to Lucy? You know, each of you, just
Yeah.
see if there's something that suits your fancy. If not, just continue to monitor.
And I can share the spreadsheet of who's assigned to which
Yeah.
monitoring group.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you, Mark. I was going to suggest that.
That'd be great.
Share it with all of us because.
Okay.
Well,
Will do.
I'm on two committees.
Yeah.
We lost Stephen Keys. I'm on two committees he was on. So we.
He has
for
been
sure.
here for the whole meeting, Kingston.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks.
I was just going to say for the benefit of our two new members, we say committees in two different ways. And so it may be a little bit confusing. There's subcommittees, which is kind of subcommittees of the COC of this group. For example, a couple of us volunteered to be on one to talk about the conflict of interest, that sort of policy area, right? We've had them based on, bylaws in the past, those sorts of things, kind of the operation of what we do. And then we also have committees where a few of us will go to, the operations committee, right, of the MWPA. A few of us will go to the technical advisory committee. So that's kind of what we're talking about now is which of the other MWPA committees would you be interested in going and monitoring and then reporting back to this group if there's anything of interest?
Can I add something to this? And this speaks actually to Larry Chu and probably to Michael, is Larry's time is very limited. He works all day, and we understand that he really does not have the time to commit to each of these meetings, and that however he does it. And Michael, that's probably going to be your case. So don't feel like, we understand you have a full schedule. Let's just put it that way. Yeah.
What happened to Jennifer? So she's busy.
Well, he explained, he was like
Right.
just taking a breath just to get here. He's had a full day, and
Yeah.
that's why I brought that up, actually.
Okay. All right.
Busy people are busy people no matter what. So
Yes,
That's right. Always.
that's right.
Okay, so I think that brings us to adjournment, unless anybody has anything else. Okay, thank you all.
Yep.
We're adjourned.
Do we have to move to adjourn?
Yes, someone, come on.
Do we?
Technically, you don't have to.
We don't do a roll
We don't
call?
have to. Oh, that's right.
For this one, you don't have to.
Enough.
And
Enough
a big
of
shout
Lori.
out to Bruce Bartell, Maria Schmidt, and Stephen Keys for sticking through the whole meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Lucy, thank you for
Thank you.
your work.
And congratulations on making it through your first meeting. Yay.
Oh, thank you. With all your
Congratulations. to
And
Rebecca.
Michael and Jennifer,
Milestone.
right. Welcome new members.
Welcome, new members.
Right.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.
Right.